break it down a little bit to structure how we put them in and where the wires are going on the outside, which will tell you where they are on the inside, so there's not this confusion about what's this, what's that. And as an aside, I've tried to get.
We stand on the X. I'm kidding.
As an aside, I'm trying, at least my patients, you'll see that there's this little label on the wire. It'll say ventricular. And those actually come with the packs of wires that they give us, but typically we haven't taken the time to put them on. But if we can do that, that will help with that issue, so you don't hook the A to the V, which is what kind of precipitated me giving this lecture, because I came by once and found that, and it was pretty easy to fix, and the patient was not doing well when they got fixed. So if we make the chest just a box, and the patient is facing you, so this the right side and the left side, you look at the pacing wires into the box on the patient. The atrial leads will come out on the right side, and the ventricular leads on the left side, almost universally. The only exception is if we're coming to an alternative incision. But in the sternotomy incision, you're going to find that every surgeon does it that way. So that helps with some of the confusion if you got bandages everywhere. If you follow the lead back to where it's coming out. If it's on the right side, it's atrial. If it's on the left side, it's ventricular. But you should see now a little label on there that says V on it. That'll help with that. So the pacing wire itself, what's on the inside, is there's just a bare metal wire in the epicardium. That's all it is. It has some of them have some retention thing on it. The one that I typically use has like a lion's mane on it, plastic lion's mane, where there's bare wire here, and then it's an insulated wire all the way here, and it's an insulated wire there. And when you pull it out, that little plastic thing just flips off, and so there's no resistance. It's designed so you can't pull it out accidentally, but if you grab it and pull, it'll just self-release and come out. When people have difficulty pulling the wires out, which you'll see sometimes, everybody says, oh my God, I'm pulling on the heart. That's not why they're hard to pull out. They're hard to pull out because when they're put out, they're caught in a suture at the fascial level. So you see if they're hard to come out, oh my God, we're gonna tear their heart. They're gonna bleed to death and blah, blah, blah. Well, you're not gonna tear their heart. You're gonna pull on that fascial wire, and they've been insulated. Most of the time, they'll just slide through. So you probably see Dr. Redder or myself come up there and say, come out. And that's why we're not thinking that it's hooked onto, tied onto the heart. It's going to tear a hole in the heart. We're thinking that it's hooked on the wire. The wire's hooked on the fascia. So that's the basic mechanics of how they're put in, what's inside and where they go. Now, pacers, when you hear us talk about them, we label them with 3 letters and sometimes a 4th. Since it's a pacemaker, the first letter is going to be the chamber paced. So typically you'll have that, ventricular. The second letter is going to be the chamber sensed. And the third letter is going to be the response to a sensed event. And you'll see an I. And that's the classic backup pacemaker, meaning that it senses the ventricle and that it's inhibited if it senses an impulse at the ventricular level. If you break that down some more, you set a rate for the pace. The pacemaker senses an interval that's equal to that rate, and if it doesn't see something here, it's going to fire. On the sensing level, you sense the amount of electrical impulse that the pacer needs to see before it's inhibited. So if you go to the submenus of the pacemaker, you'll see anything from 0.1 to 2, or actually 2.5 on some of them. So we can make it so sensitive that if you shake the bed, it's going to sense it and it's going to inhibit. Or we can make it so unsensitive that it takes like a car battery firing for it to sense it. So when you get to the extreme here, it basically becomes a non-sensing pacer. When you get over on this side, it becomes dangerous because just kind of looking, messing with the chest tubes, rolling the patient around, will cause the pacemaker to sense it. It'll inhibit, not fire properly. When you see typically someone who's got a temporary pacemaker and you see just firing at random, that's usually because of this. The sensitivity has been set to a default, which is too sensitive, meaning it's the spike that it's seeing is some other energy source. You have to increase it towards this level. Sometimes it means that it's not sensing properly anymore, that it's been dislodged. But to troubleshoot it, that's what we do. You see us go to the submenu, and what we're doing is changing the sensitivity. The other thing that is very common mistake to see is you'll see, and you think it's a pacer error, but it's not. You'll see the QRS complex come like that, and then you'll see a spike right here. The pacer is missensing. No, it's not missensing. What's happened is it's taken this time interval and it's committed to firing, but then a spike happens. So what it does when that happens, it senses that there's a spike happening. It's already committed, so it'll fire here and not on the T wave. Because if it fires late, we're going to have a possibility of V-fib. So sometimes you'll see that, and when you do that, then you have to change. You see that, you change the rate. So you shorten the rate interval, meaning that you give actually what you do is you set the pacer slow. So now it will sense in this area, not right next to where it's going to fire.
If you have your sensitivity towards 2.5, are you more at risk for having an RNG phenomenon?
Yeah, that's right. You are more at risk because what you're ending up doing is if you move the sensitivity over here, you're changing this to the O, where it's not. It's the O is what I call mindlessness. The pacer's going to fire regardless of what happens. It's just going to be mindless. It's just going to fire. So if you get to this extreme, you're basically going towards a VOO pacer. If we just talk about that particular things.
Did you say where you thought you might prefer the sensitivity, or is it just based on?
It's based on each individual. Usually, we'll set the sensitivity around 1.
Right.
Yeah, and then you just kind of play with it from there. So that's.
And you do that in the ORS.
Yeah. What happens is the anesthesiologists will do it, and they'll just turn the pacer on to the default mode. And the default mode in some of these pacers is whatever it was on before. The default mode in the others, the emergency on button gives you an asynchronous pacing on all of them. When you first come on, many of them will default to what they were set on last time they were on. Some of them will default to a DDD mode at some preset parameters, which are average parameters, and that has to do with each individual pacer you've got, and you got to kind of figure that out. But all of them will have submenus that you can manipulate to do this stuff with. What is that? All right, so let's see. Okay, the other one. Let's say capturing, because that's one of the things we worry about the most if we can't capture. As that wire comes into the heart, it's got its bare thing. That wire is supposed to be in the epicardium, meaning actually in contact with muscle. And there's a negative and a positive lead. If you look at the pacemaker, you'll see one of them's negative and one of them's positive. So the electricity goes from one to the other. One of the tricks you can use if you're not capturing is to change polarity, because the electricity goes in a direction. The negative lead needs to be in the epicardium. The positive lead can be anywhere. You can actually put it on the chest wall, hook it to anything that'll ground it out. So sometimes in extreme cases where we can't capture it, you'll see us come up there with flip polarity. We'll just change the wire from negative to positive, and that's a temporary fix most of the time. And then you gotta hopefully get a normal rhythm back. But that's quite effective sometimes. There's a bare wire on the epicardial surface, which if someone's pacer dependent is having an impulse go down there, 60 or 70, 80 times a minute. Over the course of time, since that wire is just a bare wire, you can imagine that it's sending an energy source into that part of the muscle. What's going to happen? It's going to create an injury there. Injury is going to create a scar around that wire. And the threshold for capture is going to go up. That's why these are temporary wires. They're not treated with anything to assure that we don't have an exit block, is what this is called. Well, all the temporary wires eventually develop an exit block, and as time goes by, you'll see the thresholds go up with temporary wires. We have been able to keep them in for weeks sometimes, but it's always kind of dicey. Some people within a week will form an exit block around that wire, and you'll see the thresholds go up dramatically. And that brings my pet peeve is the way to check to see what the what the threshold is in pacers. Everybody thinks, oh, he likes to do it this way. And it's not that I like to do it that way, it's because that's the right way to do it, because you're going to get into trouble if you don't do it that way. And this is the reason, because you're going to have an exit block that's going to develop as time goes by. So let's say we have Mr. Jones who's sitting around and his pacer is set at 80. And you want to figure out, and he's pacer dependent. He was pacer dependent yesterday, he's pacer dependent today for all you can see, but you want to know what his threshold is. So when I first got here, I saw the nurses go. Okay, that's a bad idea. That's a really bad idea. Well, it worked. And I didn't say it, but my comment is, yeah, that possum that ran across the road? He ran across the road because it worked for him last time. All his buddies are on the side of the road, got run over because they didn't look both ways. But it worked last time he did it, so yeah. So the way to do this is to anticipate that you're going to have a problem. So what you do is, the first thing you do is you make sure you got a rhythm underneath this thing before you try to check the threshold. Because if you don't have a rhythm underneath, there could be a potential problem. And I've kind of shown that a lot of times when I got one of the residents making rounds with me trying to teach them about this thing. So let's say that thing is set at 15 as the output on the pacer. So what you do is you take this rate and you walk it down. And the object is to walk it down until you have an underlying rhythm. And you see the patient's underlying rhythm. So you walk it down and you get to something like 40 and there's no heart rhythm. It's not the time to check what the threshold is. You just turn it back up, smile, and go about your day. If you turn it down to 40 and then you have a QRS complex, that's say 50, perfect. You know he's got an underlying rhythm, or she's got an underlying rhythm. So you can check the threshold. You take them back up to 80, then you walk the MA down until you lose capture. You write that down. Lose capture at X. Then you turn it back up until you have uptake threshold. That's the critical one. Uptake threshold early on is the same as the threshold to keep the rhythm. As time goes by and you start to get this exit block, uptake threshold becomes significantly higher than maintenance threshold. So you'll find that uptake threshold sometimes is almost 1.5 to 2 times maintenance threshold. And that's why you don't want to, or hit the pause button, which is essentially doing the same thing, because you might not capture it again. That makes sense. I think we've gone over most of the basics there. The real important stuff. Now, if we get to the dual chamber pacers, the principles are the same, except for you have an A and a B to deal with. And so that pacer mode would be this: dual chamber sensed, dual chamber paced, and the response is either an inhibition or a pace. The difference there is you have now put in an AV interval, and you put a sensing on the A, so you can sense the patient's own atrial rate. So if you've got a DDD pacer set at 80, and the patient's atrial rate is 120, that pacer is going to be going at 120 because it's going to sense the atrium and it's going to track the atrium. If you look carefully at these DDD pacers, there is an upper limit for rate, and most of the time that's kind of ignored. But if you have someone who's say an A flutter, and they're going at 150 a minute, you can set the upper limit to 100, and that pacer will automatically drop some of the beats out of there, so it'll pace the ventricle at whatever upper limit. It will pace the ventricle up to 100, and won't keep tracking up. So that's one way to use that upper limit rate. And some of the permanent pacemakers have that as well, and they'll winky block. You know, if someone starts exerting themselves, their heart rate goes way up, they'll track up to 120, then they'll winky block, just drop every other beat or whatever, to get the heart rate down to 120 beats per minute. The other thing about the permanent, when we start talking about the AV interval, the AV interval is adjustable. So if you have someone who's in first degree heart block and their native AV interval is 200 milliseconds, and you've got your pacer AV interval set at about 150, which is, I think, it's either 150 or 170 is mostly the default mode on the AV interval on these pacers when you hit go on them. If you then go in the submenu and take this AV interval up to 220, then you'll get AV conduction, which is more physiologic than just pacing, because then the ventricle will actually contract synchronously as opposed to contracting with the pacer lead in the right ventricle. And that can be somewhat frustrating, because if the AV interval is misset, then you start getting spikes everywhere. It's very confusing as to what's going on. So that's one of the things you can manipulate if you start seeing that. The atrium, the sensitivities that you use are different than the sensitivities for the ventricle. It's a lot smaller muscle, so the impulses are smaller than the sensitivities you're using, around 0.4 millivolts or something like that, not the 1 to 1.5 range. Okay.
I have one other question. So Obed, his intrinsic rate was around like 55 to 60. His index is hanging around like 2.1. His pacer was back up at 50.
Yeah.
Would you want to ever turn the rate up?
So that gentleman has ventricular leads in, and he's got a bad ventricle. It's much better to use AV pacing if you've got it. On him, since I don't like to put atrial leads in, by and large, because number one, I've had some near-death experiences with someone yanking the atrial leads off and tearing a hole in a little minimal ventricle. And number two, they're painful because sometimes they work and sometimes they don't work, and you spend half your time trying to troubleshoot it. You get to work and you're not really capturing, but you got a spike there. So with a guy like that, that's why I like dopamine.
I'm sorry.
Dopamine.
Okay.
You put on a low dose of dopamine, and they'll keep the heart rate up.
Okay.
Yeah, without having a lot of physiological consequences.
So you'd rather do dopamine than V-pace them higher?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, if you'll notice a lot of times, if you V-pace somebody, actually they're cutting up and goes down.
Okay.
I noticed that once.
Yeah. And actually the blood pressure will go down too. But yeah, if you have to V-pace something. Any other questions? Anything I haven't covered that you've thought of? All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you much.
Next time maybe we'll do this section.
Yeah, I have that one that I really want to learn.
Yeah.